Welcome to the class on play and development. In this class, we're going to look at the origins of creativity and innovation, which can be found early on in episodes of play. But before we talk about play, let's focus on the bigger issue or the bigger phenomenon of development, human development. What is the role played by creativity in development? Well, one of the biggest thinkers in the area of development and sociocultural psychology, Lev Vygotsky, said that one of the most important questions of child psychology and pedagogy is the question of creativity in children, its development, and its significance for the general development of the child. And since Vygotsky, many people have seen this close connection between creativity and what it means to develop, to learn, to grow. In many ways, when we create, we actually push forward development and exemplify human development. Creating means necessarily obtaining a new kind of insight, a new kind of a relation with the situation. So it involves an act of learning and pushes that act of learning forward. So there are many, many connections between creativity in general and human development, not only the development of cognition, but that of emotion, motivation, and social connections. But we have to wonder, though, to begin with, are children necessarily creative? This is an interesting debate. For many people, if you ask them, they would immediately agree that children are creative. And I think if we didn't think of it now in the context of the class, we would all take this for granted, right? At the same time, though, there is a debate here to be had because there are ways in which, yes, children are definitely creative. Their creative expression looks very natural and spontaneous. They always sing and play and do very interesting things. They don't really care about conventions, or they don't seem to care. Their outcomes, again, in play and singing and painting and so on, they are often surprising, at least for us as adults, and they seem to really enjoy what they're doing most of the time. At the same time, other people would say that no, children are not really creative because although they're spontaneous, they're not intentionally so. So they are spontaneous by nature, but they don't necessarily intend to create something. So, to a great extent, because they miss this intentionality, their creativity is projected or attributed by other people. It's other people who discover creativity in what they do, and not children themselves. They also don't know the conventions they're breaking. So when people are very creative, they actually intentionally break certain conventions, and that's part of the creative process. Children think outside of the box, but it's because they actually don't know what the box is like. Their outcomes are not really useful. They might be new and surprising, but that might make them bizarre at times. But if you remember from the first class, the definition of creativity includes both the surprise novelty element and an element of utility and appropriateness. Some of the things children produce are not very appropriate as responses to the situation. So, in that sense, perhaps they're not as creative. Finally, creative expression in children might be fun, but creativity in general is not always fun. A lot of creativity comes out of hard work and even dealing with hardships and overcoming difficulties. So, post traumatic growth, for example, a lot of people exemplify that. Is that the case with children? So, if we take all of these arguments together, the conclusion for many people, if we look at a book on creativity and development, for instance, co-edited by Sawyer and others, when experts talk about it, it's the following. We come to a consensus that children are not really creative, given the definitions of creativity that are necessary to explain the impact and important influential innovations that have impacted our lives. Some of us are willing to retain a residual notion of small c creativity, which is the everyday cleverness that makes us smile or makes life easier for the novel, unusual actions of children, but we all distinguish this from big C creativity, the creation of culture transforming products that are found. This big C creativity is found only in adults. So this captures something quite important and a type of conclusion that comes back again and again in the literature, that children are seemingly creative, but at the same time, it's not the version of pure creativity that we often associate, if you remember from first class, with the he paradigm, the paradigm of the genius. And yet, discourses about what children are, how they are, and what they can do have long been used actually to define not necessarily children, but as us as adults. For a long time, developmental psychology and the way we look at children has been accused of this constructing a deficit model of childhood. Children always know less than adults, they do less well. And in many ways, this serves our own positioning as superior to children, including in terms of creativity. The key questions here are children really passive or receptive only, or are they active and interacting and therefore agentic and potentially creative? Is creativity only the extraordinary, the breakthrough innovation, you remember again from the he paradigm, or is it embedded very much in the ordinary forms of living, in the I and the we paradigm, right? The answer to these questions determines in the end whether not only we accept that children are creative, but if we don't think that they're creative, then basically we're not going to look for creativity in children, we're not going to expect creativity from them, and therefore we won't really foster it. So at the end of the day, it makes a lot of sense to actually validate children as creative, because then you'll have a better chance to identify and to foster their creative expression. So, how does creativity begin in childhood? Well, the origin of creativity in many ways it's in episodes of pretend play. What do children do when they pretend play? Basically, they interact with objects and other people as if they were different. They still understand that a block of wood is a block of wood, but they treat it as if it was a car, and they play with it as if it was a car. So this is the freedom we obtain, children obtain from early on, from 1 and 2 years of age even, when they start being able to symbolize, to play with meanings and symbols and objects. It is this capacity to temporarily disconnect perception, what they see, that it's a block of wood or a bottle of water, and infuse it with new meanings. The cup can become a house, right? And can hide a toy soldier. So this is the basis for creative expression later on in life and for innovations in a variety of domains. Our openness to the environment and flexibility when it comes to looking at how things are and what they could be. All of this finds its origins in pretend play. Pretend play is the beginning of creativity because we get to experiment, we get to, try and make errors in a rather safe environment. And we have here an illustration of how we develop all sorts of skills, including motricity. And importantly, we also start interacting with others and creating life situations in which we get to experiment with social norms. We know these norms, so here you have a beautiful picture of children probably serving a kind of tea or a meal to their toys. What these children are doing is that they're rehearsing culture, they're rehearsing conventions and norms, and they never do it in the same way. The creative part is that they always get to change and play with the norms while learning about them. And very important for creativity as well, in play, children get to experiment the world from different positions and from different perspectives. So they get to be a chef or a cook or a scientist or an explorer. And all of these perspectives are very useful because they open up new possibilities of seeing the world, of understanding the world. And later on, as we grow, Vygotsky as well said that imagination is internalized play. So when we play as children, we need all of these physical props to imagine, to create. But as we grow older, we actually get to internalize this play and actually to start symbolically to play with ideas, right? Instead of just playing with material objects. But what is the developmental path of creativity? So if we accept that children are creative, and if we see the reason why pretend play is the origin of creativity, we also have to notice, together with Gardner, that the preschool years are often described as this golden age of creativity, a time when every child sparkles with artistry. And as those years pass, however, it seems that a kind of corruption takes over, so that ultimately most of us mature into, Gardner says, artistically stunted adults. This is a common observation. I think it happened to many of us. If you think back of how much you used to paint and draw as children, we tend to do that quite a lot as young children, and then we stop doing that. What happens after these preschool years when we have much more freedom and confidence to experiment? Well, Torrance was one of the big names of in producing a test for creativity, the Torrance tests of creative thinking, and a pedagogue. He actually found evidence using divergent thinking measures that there is a slump, there is a decrease in creativity scores as children move from kindergarten to first grade, and especially first grade to fourth grade of school. Why is that the case? Why are these slumps taking place? On the one hand, you can think about normal cognitive development, the fact that the cognition and the brain of children is developing, and they get, in Piaget's terms, they get to go from more concrete forms of logic to more formal types of logic. They get to become much more sensitive to what other people are thinking and to what the social convention or social norm is, and that's part of development. Also, they have a newly gained social awareness. As they become older, they care much more about discovering the norm. Actually, if you see older children play, sometimes they are very keen on reinforcing the rule and quite upset with you as an adult if you break the rule. Rules become important. And there is obviously a change in institutional arrangement. So kindergarten is markedly different, and the experience of being in kindergarten compared to school, primary school, and also there is a big difference when one moves from primary school to gymnasium or secondary school in terms of expectations and the way teachers deal with the child. And this is why a lot of people look at school as a killer of creativity. And in this week, you will have an exercise reflecting on this idea. Are schools really killing creativity? Because basically what they often do is that they focus the child on convergent thinking rather than divergent thinking. So they focus the child on getting the right idea, the correct answer. And maybe doing so, they decrease the potential for multiple ideas and for more creativity. At the same time, though, we have to be a bit critical of this discovery of the creativity slumps, because maybe they do depend a lot on the tool we use to evaluate creativity. So we often evaluate creativity using divergent thinking tests, but there is much more to creating than just diverging. Convergence, evaluation, and synthesis are part of the creative process. Acquiring knowledge is also very much part of creativity. As we mentioned just before, if a child, a very young child, seems spontaneous and free of constraints, it's because they don't know the constraints. In order to create, to be a real creator, you have to know what you're going against. So an interesting view to summarize this came from Dudek and others. Maybe it's not really a slump that is happening, but it's actually a form of renaissance during school years and entering school. So Dudek said, I don't believe there is a drop in creativity in the form that exists at this age, which was 8-9 years. I believe that what we see is a change in the quality of expressiveness. The adult concludes the painting shows little of its former creativeness. By previous standards, it had lost its freedom and spontaneity, but the acquired control reveals that the mind is now ready for more complex activity, possibly for creativity. So the idea behind this is that you might become less expansive and less spontaneous, but by acquiring the standards, you actually now get to practice to become more masterful and to become ready for more complex forms of creativity. It is by knowing the constraints that you actually get to truly test their limits and be able to go even further from them. So to sum up, creativity and development are deeply interrelated, and it is the case that children, when they create, they learn and they grow through this process. And children's creativity is often a contested category, but in a pragmatic sense, it is always useful to bet on it and to assume that children, yes, can be creative, because then you're going to actually want to discover their creativity and cultivate it. Creativity originates in episodes of pretend play, as I argued, when the world the child interacts with is interacted both as it is and as it could be. So discovering new possibilities and new ways of being in the world is very much part of the story of creativity. Finally, the developmental path of creativity is not a linear one. There are always moments of slumps and peaks, but we have to think a bit critically about them. And we also have to understand them in the context, the life context of each and every child. There are some patterns across children, across cultures, across life circumstances, but each and every person's developmental path in terms of creativity is quite unique. And although there are slumps, kind of decreases along the way, there are also peaks, and we have to be able to capture and to make the best out of these moments.